Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Welcome back to Integrated. My name is Angela Erickson, and if you are new here, I'm so excited that you are joining us today for this amazing interview with Dr. Carrie Gress. And sorry about the I don't know, I was slow on the trigger there with the introduction, but I'm really excited about today. I've had Dr. Carrie Gress on before, and I've been a huge fan of her work for a long time. But just before we get started, of course, I have to ask you, if you like this, please actually like the video, share, subscribe, do all of those wonderful things, and feel free to check out ways you can support this podcast. It just always is so helpful to me and helps me be able to put this out for other people to find, especially when we're talking about really important things like feminism and the occult. I think both are sort of, I don't know if feminism is on the rise, but I think sort of this awareness of the occult is certainly more prevalent right now. And I've thought for a long time that these things were intertwined very deeply. And so, of course, it's been nice to see more attention called to that, calling feminism to the carpet a little bit, and shedding a light on some of the nefarious roots of the feminist movement and its entanglements with things like communism and et cetera. So with that, I'm excited to welcome on Dr. Carrie Gress. She is she's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a scholar at the Institute of Human Ecology at Catholic University of America. She's also the founder and co-editor of an online women's magazine known as Theology of Home. I know a lot of women follow Theology of Home, especially Catholic women, and she's the author of 10 books, including The End of Woman and the Anti-Mary Exposed. I did talk about the Anti-Mary Exposed with her in a previous interview. So if you want to, feel free to go back and find that interview. It's also a wonderful interview. And right now she lives in Virginia with her husband and her 5 children. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Carrie Gress. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really fun to be back on with you again.
Oh, it's I feel like this is such a big issue, right? Like people feel very charged and strongly about it. I've written about it. Feminism in some ways from the angle of like, why are women rejecting motherhood so much? And that was published in an article in Crisis Magazine. And I feel like I got a lot of pushback on that, even though it was a more sympathetic view to why mothers are sort of afraid to embrace motherhood, why it's so hard for so many women to be mothers. But it's really important that we drill down on, where did this all begin? So maybe for you personally, where did this investigation start for you, and why did you seek these answers? Because I think a lot of us are afraid to know the truth.
Yeah. Well, quite honestly, this was never really my intention to go into women's issues. I found women's issues really boring and dry, and a lot of it is very academic too. And so I think that was always my frustration, was the sense of like, I can read this because I have a PhD in philosophy, but I cannot give this to friends of mine. I can't give this, like, this feels very unhelpful for me to be able to help other women really understand human nature and the church and, just all of these very essential things. And so I just, I said aloud, actually, when I was still in graduate school, I will never work on women's issues. And of course, God has a sense of humor, but
He does.
because here I am, I feel like that's all I write about, even though, my doctoral studies had nothing to do with this. But anyway, all of that has certainly helped me significantly to be able to research this and see really where the problems lie. And the probably the first place I started talking about this was when my daughter, who was probably 4 or 5 at the time, asked me the question, what is it that girls can do that is better than what boys can do? And this is something that I should have had at my fingertips, like a very quick, easy, beautiful answer. And I found myself really humming and hawing and not feeling like I was coming up with something that was very good, even at a 4-year-old's level. And so I think that was part of it. I think I was also really doing a lot of research into Our Lady and her role in civilization, and what happens when civilizations are crumbling. And so these pieces just kind of fit together. And one book led to the next. I wrote the first book on Our Lady, was The Marian Option. I also wrote this other book called The Ultimate Makeover, which, I regret the name, but the title, but But I think it does still say what happens is, I think
Mm-hmm.
that motherhood really transforms us in ways that we would never be transformed, or would be very difficult to transform us into much more virtuous people. So anyway, I could talk about this for hours. I think it's very long. It's been a really long journey, but I think the more that I've dug into it, the more outraged I've been that this has had such a foothold, especially among Catholic women for the last 50 years, that we have bought into it, and asking the question, well, why have we bought into it? And what are the parts that we can actually accept? And what's feminism really doing? So anyway, that's and this particular book, The End of Woman, came about because I wrote The Anti-Mary Exposed. And in that book, I only went back to second wave feminism. I didn't look at first wave feminism at all. And I wanted a book that was actually more secular, or that I could give to Protestants, because of course the title, The Anti-Mary Exposed, is really off-putting from the get-go. So all of these things kind of came together in this book. And, I was amazed at what I found in first wave feminism. I had just had this belief, like so many others, that first wave feminism was this very pure kind of feminism that we could really dig into and embrace. And when I started seeing like what it really was, I was just flabbergasted. Like, how is it that this is really what it is? And nobody knows this, and nobody's talking about this, and nobody's warning us that really, if those foundations of the first wave hadn't been so corrupt, then the second wave probably never would have come about. The second wave is the full bloom of the first wave. So anyway, that's kind of the long story short of how we got here.
You bring up so many great points, and I did want to ask you about this particular question of Catholic feminists, because I've been an anti-abortion activist for over a decade now. I started in college. I ran a Students for Life group on my secular public university at a very, very liberal university. And I remember sort of, after that, I worked for Students for Life of America, and it was very in vogue to consider yourself a pro-life feminist. A lot of pro-life feminist organizations. And I can see that I sort of adopted that title because I wanted to have some common ground with my liberal counterparts to kind of, I don't know, extend part of myself and say, hey, no, I agree with you on certain things, right? And try and build common ground so we could address the abortion issue. And after I left, I feel like so much of what you're saying comports with my own experience, because after I stopped working, I sort of had this identity crisis of like, I'm a stay-at-home mom now, and now my value isn't rooted in my career. Was I really placing so much of my identity in my career? I don't think I'd realized that, even as a Catholic woman who was pro-life. I didn't realize how much of my life was rooted in feeling like I had to be quote unquote productive in an economic sense. And where does that come from? So this notion of Catholic feminism or pro-life feminism, do you think that it's possible to be a Catholic feminist? Because I personally don't, but I think I'd love to hear your perspective on what feminism actually is, and if those two can be, I don't know,
can coincide and exist peacefully. So this is really the fundamental question. And I think if you go back to first wave feminism, the first person to really articulate the three elements that I think are constitutive, or the three defining elements of feminism, even in the first wave. The first one is the occult. The second one is this idea of free love, and the third one is smashing the patriarchy. What became the smashing the patriarchy? This radical egalitarianism, where you get rid of the church, you get rid of hierarchy of any kind, including the military, including monarchy, et cetera, et cetera. All of this is coming out of the French Revolution. So that's sort of, there's a lot of baggage that's already there that is articulated in the first wave. And it's articulated by man. It's Percy Shelley is this poet, English poet, romantic poet. And his wife, people probably know better, Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. So while Mary Shelley's writing Frankenstein, he's writing this poem about this woman named Sithna, who is this idealized woman because she has no husband and she has no children. And she's kind of the first woman in all of literature to be that woman. And that's really where what feminism has operated on, is that idea of the woman who's detached from those kinds of relationships, and she can really just focus on her independence. And that's been the focus from the beginning. And, part of it was feminism was asking this question, not how do we help women as women, but how do we help women become more like men? So Sitna is sort of this, disordered woman, that's trying to be, well, she's this idealized woman that's trying to be like a disordered man, the man that, no one really wants in their life, and because he's narcissistic and selfish and self-absorbed and lives for himself. Um, and this is in the 1810s. I mean, this was not something that
Not
is
in the
in
60s or 50s.
no,
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, this is
Yeah,
way
this
back.
is very, very early on. And so this was the fascinating thing, was for me to be able to see that there's these cycles that happen that started, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and then they just keep coming back. You see the same cycles with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony in the late 1880s, 1890s. And then it comes up again in the 1900s, and then it comes up in greater force in the 1960s. So it's really interesting to just look at those patterns and really see what has been at the bedrock of feminism. So, if that's the working definition, then yes, absolutely, we have a problem being Catholic feminists, because there's not a single piece of that we can embrace. The church
Right.
is a patriarch.
patriarchy.
Yeah. The church has never taught that that free love is a good thing. I mean, we know the family is the bedrock of society and civilization. This is what the church has told us and reminded us, and has fought for, and has been really the opposition of communism. And we know that the occult is obviously not engaged with feminism, or Christianity. The
Right.
occult can't be, is incompatible with that. So that's the hard part, is that those are the key elements that have been there for about 200 years. And I know that there are people that have really wanted to reclaim feminism and make it something else. And I have a lot of respect for people that are trying to do that. I think that it's a very difficult task, though. I think because you have to define yourself apart from those other realities, and basically just redefine the word in your own terms, which doesn't feel like a
Right.
very successful kind of recapitulation. It's not, especially when you think about how much damage feminism has done. I mean, we talk about the cost to women, and this is one of the things that's really motivated me, of course, is just looking at the metrics of how unhappy women are today. Everything from depression to STDs and substance abuse and suicides. All of these things are pointing to some incredibly unhappy women. And then there's, of course, the body count. You've got it absolutely came. Feminism absolutely ushered in this break between the notion that a mother and a child have this irreparable bond. Feminism really snipped that. And that's what ushered in abortion and the numbers that we have. I mean, this is sort of unheard of, the fact that we worldwide last year in 2022, you have 74 million abortions worldwide. How many people died total of everything else? Somewhere around 64 million. So we had 10 million more abortions than we did have than people died of everything else.
Right.
And that's like twice the population of Canada. I think Canada is something like 39 million. I can't remember. But I mean, these are huge numbers. This is like entire populations of a whole country just wiped out through abortion. So I think that those are the things that, make me pause and say, why would you want to associate yourself with feminism when it has not, we know we have to look at the fruit of something, and there hasn't been good fruit
Right.
of this. And, I understand that impulse of really wanting to find common ground. And I wholeheartedly agree that you have to find common ground with people to be able to have a conversation. I just don't think that this is a way that's actually going to be helpful and is going to move the ball forward. I think people are seeing the brokenness, and that what their heart really wants is something more beautiful and compelling, and that suits our human nature. So it really just feels like it's not been, and it hasn't been that effective either. I mean, I think we've had 30 years at least of trying to do this. And I don't see the Catholics even aren't, our numbers on abortion and birth control are just the same as the general population. So it's not even working within the church to try and redefine this. I think it's just creating an incredible amount of confusion among, all women in general, but certainly among Catholic women, about what does it really mean to be a woman, and, Nobody can answer that question.
Exactly. And that's the other thing too, is I find so striking. I've received a lot of backlash saying you can't really baptize feminism. Like words either have meaning or they don't. We don't get to rewrite
Right.
every single word because
Right.
it brings so much confusion when we try to do that. That's what the left is actually really good at. They redefine terms and we
Mhm.
adopt them
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
And that's been one of the most startling things that I talk about a lot, is just how, they've defined their position of what the cool woman is. They've also defined what our position is, what we think of. We like, the human mind likes binaries. We like, you know, yes or no, black or white. It's much easier to think in those terms. And so they've created the cool woman, and then they've created the doormat. They've created the woman who's part of a fertility cult and her red bonnet. And we see those women who marched out all the time because that's what they're trying to create, is this opposition that's not real, but people think it's real. People think, oh, well, if I don't agree with everything feminism says, then I must be in this camp. And so I think that that's a hugely enormous piece that women and men miss, but I think particularly women, is this notion of the tribalism of it, and the fact that we want to fit in. We want to be, part of the tribe of the cool women. And, we see this a lot even in the church, of how often is it that there's some celebrity who's had this conversion. And then of course we realize, like, oh, they're not quite ready for prime time yet, because they haven't figured
Yeah.
out, like, same-sex marriage isn't okay, all of these kinds of things. And then suddenly they're dropped like a hot potato. So there is that desire to sort of feel like, um, our faith can be accepted by the cool people. But that's really what I think what is damaging us so much, is instead of trying to fit our faith into this lane of popularity, why are we not offering people an off-ramp to see something totally different and totally beautiful, and that doesn't at all correspond with the Handmaid's Tale submissive nonsense? So I think that's really what the task of Catholic women is today. And it can't come from men. Men are not going to talk about this. Men have been so beaten down by feminism. It's like kryptonite. You can just hear how much they do not want to talk about it. And it's actually probably the most effective way that I have to end a conversation with a man on, like, an airplane or something, is I just say I write about feminism, and the conversation is over.
That's
So
hilarious. Yeah, because
yeah,
they would probably actually realize, "Oh, you don't mean that you're in favor of feminism," but they probably just assume the
they just
worst, right?
assume.
They're
Right.
black
Exactly.
pilled. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people, especially men these days, are sort of becoming black pilled, and that's a whole nother
Mhm.
cultural problem that we're having because
Right.
people are not getting married. There's not
Yeah.
trust between the sexes. They don't view each other as complementary anymore. We're at
Mhm.
odds with each other, and that's
Yeah.
another result of feminism.
Absolutely.
Um, and I have
Absolutely.
to wonder too, like when I was doing pro-life work, we always talked about, like, yes, women, you can do it all, you can have it all, you
Mhm.
can be a mom and you can still achieve your dreams and everything else, yada yada
Right.
yada. And I
Right.
feel like we're setting women up for failure, and they become
Mhm.
disillusioned when they realize, oh, I can't have it all, because
Yeah.
life doesn't allow us to have it all. Life is about choices,
Mhm.
hard choices. And I
Yeah.
feel like no one in the Catholic pro-life feminist movement has given me an answer for that. Why
Mhm.
are we telling women they can have it all when that's just not true?
Mhm.
That's not
Yeah.
true. And often
Well,
our dreams change after we have children.
I think that's exactly right too. And this has been one of the things it's not in my book, but I've really started thinking about it deeply, is, there was a study done by men. 1,000 men were asked, what's the difference between a good man and a real man? And, the answers are very similar all around the world. The good man was the one that was sacrificed himself and, was courageous and brave. And the real man was the one that was just about money and sex and, all of that.
Hmm.
Very clear conceptions. But we cannot do that anymore with women. Why? Because we don't have a concept of a good woman anymore. The good woman is the one who has opportunities and walks through those and tries. She's grasping at something. That's just this constant grasping. It's this constant
Hmm.
careerism, or this constant, like you were saying, trying to grasping at it all. But there's no question of, morality to it. No question of virtue. No question of goodness, selflessness. We have just thrown, um, it's like a fire that we're just keep adding gas onto, because we're trying to tell women that this is really what's going to make you happy. and we're not really giving them a way in which they authentically can be happy.
Right. Because
Because
they're
it
not
just
made
feels
for
like,
that.
yeah, it just feels like the goalposts move, and or seasons change, or opportunities come and fade, and we don't have the skill set to really discern that properly, because the fact that we've been told over and over again, be ambitious, go for it, make the money, all of this, like, that's what we're coached in. And so when it comes to the question of what does it mean to be a good woman, we can't even begin to answer that in terms that anybody prior to the 1960s would get. I
Mhm.
think that people back, and I think men have an idea of this. They just don't want to say what it is. And you can see it very
Yeah.
clearly in poetry. You see it in music lyrics. All of this speaks very loudly about what they think a good woman is. And it's really beautiful. I've been reading a lot of poetry, and trying to find love letters and things like this, because I think they're just so beautiful and tender, the way, gruff men in war are writing to the women that they love. And
Mm.
there's something that it's not their ambition that they love, it's just this tender heart that can absorb them and enfold them in who they are, and bring them a kind of peace and goodness and tranquility. So anyway, I think it's really fascinating to start looking at what is it women are really capable of doing, and what is it they really offer to others, which I think is
Mhm.
also a sense of who other people are, that we offer a kind of mirror, um, because we reflect others' goodness back to them. So
Mhm.
it's these kinds of things that we never hear about, because we're so busy being told we have to be the girl boss or
Right.
whatever. And this is what's really creating the tedium and the boredom and the discontent. And women feel like it, the discontent is because they don't have enough yet. So that's and because so it's transformed into rage and anxiety or anger, instead of what it really ought to be, which is, a search for something deeper and more beautiful and compelling.
Well, it makes me think of your difficulty in trying to answer that question for your 4 or 5-year-old daughter.
Mhm.
What is it? Well, the thing that we excel at is motherhood. That's the thing that
Right.
women can do that men cannot do. And
Exactly.
yet feminism pushed this desire for individuality and severing
Mhm.
that dyad relationship that you described.
Yes.
And the thing is it's so unnatural for women because we're made for relationship with one another.
Mhm.
And yet like that's just how we're designed. That's how our brains work. That's how our
Yeah.
bodies physically work and a
Mhm.
physiological level. And then you expand that and you look at, well, how does this connect with the occult and this desire for
Mhm.
more power? Because that's essentially what it is. It's a desire for
Mhm.
control. And that's why
Yes.
women go into the occult. So would you mind talking about
Mhm.
this phenomenon? Because we have
Mhm.
celebrities who are, professing now to be
Mhm.
witches and to be in
Yeah.
covens and things like that. You wrote about it in a great article that was published, I believe, in the National Catholic Register.
Mhm.
I can't
Very
remember what
soon.
that was. I can't remember what it was called. I just read it today, though. And that
Feminism's Dark DNA is
yes,
the title
that's
of it.
what it is. Yes, and you
Yeah.
guys, if you haven't read it, you need to go read it. But I would love to
Mhm.
talk to you about that
Mhm.
connection between feminism and the
Yeah.
occult specifically, because
Yeah.
a lot of people look at first wave feminism and they have the same idyllic sort of thought that it was just sort of this pure form of feminism where
Mhm.
they just wanted women to have property, to be able to own property. They just wanted women to be able to vote, which I mean,
Mhm.
even that I I would say I don't think women probably need to vote if
Mhm.
they're married or what have you. But I would love for you to talk about that
Yeah.
last part of it, the occult, because no one talks about that part.
Yeah. So this was one of the pieces that was most astounding to me. I found this book called Satanic Feminism, actually, shortly after I finished writing The Anti-Mary Exposed, and I kind of flipped through it. It's a super academic book. It's a dissertation of this Swedish man, and he goes through and talks about kind of all the layers of feminism in the 1700s um, and 1800s. And it's really shocking. It's really but it's a really tedious book, and I didn't get through very much of it because I just didn't need to at that point. Um, and then I went back to actually the creepy thing is that I was assuming that this man was against satanic feminism. And then I started reading it more carefully, and I realized, like, he's actually a proponent of this. Like, he's a very pro satanic feminist author or writer, scholar. So anyway, that was really interesting to figure that out. But the book itself was remarkable because it went into all these areas that do really get polished over. I mean, we see this in the second wave all the time, is the amount of occult and things, mental illness, all these kinds of things are really polished over to make the women look like they're very successful and put together. And a lot of the second wavers have just these incredibly tragic stories of how their lives ended or what happened to them, that the sisterhood could not take care of for them. It's because they broke themselves up. They separated themselves away from family and thought the sisterhood would be what would bring them the ultimate happiness that the family couldn't. So, but going all the way back, you've got, again, Percy Shelley, who's our the mind behind feminism. He was hugely into the occult and very much, he actually spent the night in a tomb so that he could conjure up the devil. He was this man that saw like no limits. Like it just felt like he was against, he could withstand everything in the world. And tragically, he died in a boating accident when he was 29 years old. And once again,
he was
trying to,
young.
yeah, very young man. But he also was really interested in this idea of how to rewrite Genesis 3. How do you remake Eve, not into a fallen woman, but how do you recreate her in this image of a woman who was given an opportunity by the serpent? And
That
that's
is
what he
so
did.
evil. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so
And that's what
evil.
he did. And that's the idea that also got picked up by this woman, Madame Blavatsky, who started Theosophy. She was this crazy, like, Russian noble that traveled to all these places like Tibet and picked up all these different religions and kind of cobbled together what she wanted. And but at the heart of it was this idea of the kind of knowledge that Eve received from the serpent. And so who picks this up but Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was very much into spiritualism and saw spiritualism as this great opportunity for women, because what does it do? What did it do? It got rid of men in religion. You no longer needed a priest. All you needed was a bunch of women sitting around a spirit table and, getting the knocking back from through seances, that the spirits would speak to you. And that's how you got answers for everything. And you see this in the people that she associated with. She became very anti-Christian later in her life. She wrote this book called The Women's Bible, which you can still get today very, very easily. And, it sort of reads like an angry teenager. It's kind of embarrassingly bad commentary on scripture, trying to rewrite, every time a woman appears, she's trying to like right the wrong that she sees happening in the Bible. So this is, the 1800s, which I think we think of as very Victorian. And, the research that I did on this just blew that all up. There was nothing prudish or pristine about certainly the second wave feminism. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton actually got herself into so much trouble. She got kicked out of her own organization because the scandals and her book and all of these things were just so deeply problematic that she was thrown out. And that's and then there was so much infighting. There were two major suffrage groups. There was so much infighting among them that the suffrage movement was stymied for 30 years. And it wasn't until, the 1919 that it came to pass after the First World War. So it's really interesting to start seeing the underbelly of it and to really realize what's motivating it. And much of it really was this element of the occult and, throughout the first wave. And then, of course, the second wave, absolutely. And I feature a lot in the Anti-Mary Exposed. I went into it probably a lot more in depth in that book than I do in this book. But yeah, it's just rampant. There's this one book that I think was kind of a handbook for the feminist movement. And it actually has this group called Witch, which is some kind of acronym. I can't remember what the title of it is. But the book includes an appendix which has like everyday spells that you can just use for common experiences. I mean, this is like a mainstream, supposedly normal feminist book, and it's got spells in it. So this is, it's very common. Again,
well, that really speaks to that was expected. There's no explanation in there for why those are in there. It's not like here's your new guidebook. This is, I mean, it's just sort of, yeah. I mean, you always read between the lines, when you look back on church documents and things like that, of like, well, what's assumed here? And like why
Yeah.
they don't
Yeah.
explain this particular dogma, but it was already assumed that everybody understood this thing.
Right. This is
And
important.
that's
Yeah.
exactly. And so you see something like that and it's just
Mhm.
understood that that's how
Mhm.
things are when it's just
Yeah.
already there.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. And the other reality is, and you mentioned already, is just this idea of power and control. And that's what witchcraft, this is why people are drawn to it, because they feel weak and or stymied by something, and that witchcraft, gives them a kind of power over things remotely. I mean, you see this all over the place. This is why it's predominantly women who are, weaker physically, and so it's an avenue through which our resentment can be expressed, and revenge can be enacted. So those things are happening simultaneously. So there's a sense of becoming powerful over our enemies, and that's really what it has been. I mean, feminism is built on envy, on this idea of we need to be like men. And it's this lording and this control and this power over men and against men. And so witchcraft is just absolutely a very natural piece of that, to gain control of it. So, yeah, it's become so commonplace. In fact, I was just at a store today, and it's just the new age stuff it's just everywhere. You can't really get away from it. It's very much made to look mainstream and normal and hip and all of that. And it's just scary how prevalent and commonplace it's become in our daily lives.
Well, and I mean, sometimes the way that it's presented, I mean, I think of as a kid, I mean, a lot of
Mhm.
people, we had a magic 8 ball, right? And you would ask it a question, shake it, and
Right, who didn't have the magic 8 ball?
right?
Exactly.
I was just
Right.
thinking about that recently. I saw
Yeah.
something somewhere about, these are typical things in the occult. And I thought, oh my goodness,
Mhm.
we had one of those. My
Yeah,
mom would have never allowed us to have a Ouija board or anything like that, but
right.
we had a magic 8 ball. It's like,
Yeah.
well, it's kind of the same thing. You're
Yep.
asking it a question and waiting for it to like give
Yep.
you some kind of an answer. And
Yeah.
it seems so innocuous, right? And that just is
Mhm.
the beginning
Mhm.
to going further and asking
Yeah.
more questions and wanting, especially the way that these witches and pagans often sort of adopt this Gaia, Mother Earth
Yeah.
goddess thing, looking because they're
Yeah.
still looking for a figurehead, right? But it has
Always.
to be
Mhm.
feminine and it has to be
Yep.
nurturing, and they're not
Mhm.
realizing that they're still worshiping something that's created and not
Yeah.
surrendering. It's
Mhm.
so interesting to watch this
Yeah.
progression happen and the way that it is right now. And I do feel like witchcraft is becoming very popular,
Mhm.
um, and there's like this special time in the church. Like there's just so much resistance to the truth that
Mhm.
this is a unique time to be alive, where we get to be hopefully growing as saints. Like this is
Yeah.
what we're doing real warfare right now. I mean,
Yeah.
this is real
Right.
spiritual warfare. Do
Yeah.
you Okay, so there are a couple of questions here, and I want to
Mhm.
ask you this one first. Claire is wondering if we could touch on the role that trauma may play in the attraction to feminism and the occult, because there is a very strong connection
Oh, trauma. Yeah.
on many levels, whether
Mhm.
it's sexual abuse or
Mhm.
bad relationships with moms. Often, a lot of the early
Mhm.
feminists
Yeah.
were lesbians, but a lot of that was,
Yeah.
you often find a correlation there. So, what else did you
Mhm.
find
Mhm.
in the lives of these people that
Yeah.
were adopting this?
No, I think that's a great question, and that was one of the things I also discovered. The first part of my book is actually called The Lost Girls, because almost to a one, all of these women, starting with Mary Wollstonecraft and going up through, even second wave feminism, all these women are incredibly broken, and they come from either broken homes or kind of abuse. All of this is there. And that's was the fascinating thing, to sort of see that pattern emerge. I mean, these aren't just sort of your everyday women who have had very like Mayberry kinds of lives. These are, Mary Wollstonecraft in particular had these horrible parents that you can just see the disorder that was wreaked in her life, because her father was this awful alcoholic. I mean, there's this horrible story about him hanging the family dog at some point because he got angry, and abusing his wife. And anyway, she was really in the heart of all that, and she had a mother who also was just unsympathetic and unnurturing. She loved her first son for most and nobody else really. So Mary took care of the other children. And
Mm.
anyway, I mean, it's just these horrible stories. And that the fascinating thing to me was that the response, because of that trauma, was always things have to be changed in a more liberalizing way, not we need to go back to the 10 commandments, or we need to go back to bring order to things, or maybe there was something wrong with my parents and I had a bad impression of
Yes.
what ought to, what life ought to be like. Those questions are not asked, and instead it just keeps getting pushed further and further. And there's another woman in the book that I talk about who's not well known. She was known in the media back in the 1890s as Mrs. Satan, because she was very much a proponent of free love, and she was the first woman to have a brokerage firm in New York City because she was a medium, and she would ask the spirits how people should invest their money, and that's how she got her answers. And anyway, I mean, she's this fascinating character, and but tragically, she was prostituted from, the beginning of her life. Her father was this literal like snake oil salesman and wanted in like 11 states. And it was the relationship with her that actually brought Elizabeth Cady Stanton down, because Katie Stanton saw that Victoria Woodhull had all this fame and people were clamoring to know her. And so she invited her to come speak to one of their events. And anyway, it was a disaster. But again, here's this girl that, she's been prostituted by her own father since she's a very little girl. Also served as mediums in all these sort of spiritual revivals that are going on around the country, especially in Ohio and New York City. And, this woman doesn't have a chance because she's just so broken and awful, in terms of just what she experienced and lived through, and ultimately what sadly she became.
Right.
And that's really the pattern that we see. So over and over again, or at least I saw, doing research for this book, was that movement towards getting rid of things instead of fixing things, or saying like maybe this is skewing my vision. So I think it's a fascinating thing to study, how our trauma and sin can really blind us to truth.
Well, and I find a similar trajectory. You see the same trend basically with divorce, right? Like you have parents who are not getting along, and instead of saying, well, we have to have a conversion of heart and renew ourselves and grow in holiness to
Yeah.
bring sanctification to our marriage and healing, instead the answer is always, well, we just need to separate then. No one wants to put the work in and break those cycles. And the people left holding the bag are the kids every single time. They are the ones carrying the crosses that their parents put down, as Layla Miller says. And so it just goes to show, like, so everything we already know that is true and that works is in sacred scripture. Like it's in the Catholic Church. It's in the deposit of faith. We know what works, and the church is very clear about that. Thanks be to God. I mean, there are a lot of people who are part of religions where it's not as clear, because it's up to that individual to determine that, and we don't have to do the heavy lifting. It's already been done for us. Thanks be to God.
Well, and I think that's another interesting point, an important point, is the fact that this is coming out of the French Revolution. And what's the French Revolution trying to do? It's trying to get rid of the church entirely, literally like cutting off the heads of priests and religious, and I mean, doing incredibly awful things to the church and in the church, and desacralizing and blaspheming and defaming. All of this is happening in French culture, which is was so tightly connected with the church. So that's this impulse isn't just in women; it's in people who are broken. Let's get rid of these things, and even the whole romantic movement that Percy Shelley was a part of, Mary Wollstonecraft was a part of, was this idea of how do we start focusing on moving forward in a moral way without the church, without the 10 commandments. And this is really where the heavy emphasis upon reason and virtue came about, because they were like, well, we've got these things, we don't need the 10 commandments, we don't need the church, we've got these things. And of course
we could be a virtuous atheist.
Exactly. So it's incredible to see how old these ideas are, again, just cycling through over and over again, each generation, following the next.
So do you see any trends then that are sort of or like where you see we might be actually trending in a good direction? I mean, I see a lot of women in my life, and I think there is sort of a I don't know, like a pocket of social media, especially Instagram, of women trying to reclaim femininity and bring beauty into their lives and cultivate relationship and true community again. Do you feel like that's just a one-off kind of outlier thing, or do you think
Mhm.
women as a whole are slowly starting to reject the lies of feminism?
Yeah, no, I think it's happening. I mean, I probably wouldn't have written this book if I didn't think it was happening and people be open to actually buying it and reading it. I think, crazily, Matt Walsh has done more for women than almost anyone in the last
Oh, that's
decade.
interesting. Because
By
of his wife
asking that
woman?
one
Yeah.
stupid question, what is a woman? And really exposing that we have no idea what a woman is. And much of it is because of the fact that we've taken away the concept of motherhood from women. And I don't mean that just biologically, I mean psychologically and spiritually as well. And the church obviously has the long and gorgeous tradition and history of spiritual motherhood, especially with religious. So I think that um, has really sparked something and now, even talking about this book, a lot of times I encounter people that from all kinds of walks of life, just in my daily life. And so I actually have a way to sort of frame this and say, well, how did we get to this point where we don't even know what a woman is? And no matter what stripe of political, preference they still have to admit that we don't know how to define a woman. And so then it starts a conversation which probably wouldn't have happened otherwise if I had just told them the name of my book or something like that. So I
Yeah.
feel like there's a way to actually start having these conversations with people. And I'm a big fan of asking questions. And I think that that's just such an effective tool. And Matt Walsh has used that so well in a way that has helped so many of us, I think, move forward in this.
Well, and I think the only way we are going to move forward is if we are engaging people with a degree of intellectual
Mhm.
honesty where we're
Right.
assuming charitable things about them. I think it's really easy to
Mhm.
have the us versus them mentality that we sort of talked
Yeah.
about because we like black and white. It's
Yeah.
really easy for us. We want to identify who our tribe is and who we are fighting
Mhm.
against. It's how we
Mhm.
create our own communities, and that's very natural. But if
Yeah.
we're going to bring healing, we do have to find common ground where without
Mhm.
compromising. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
saying betray what you believe, but find common ground where possible and acknowledge that a lot of this, all of it, is really rooted in brokenness because that's what the enemy does.
Mhm.
He deceives and he
Mhm.
divides and like we have to rise above that
Yeah.
in our conversations about feminism and new age and all of this stuff. I do
Mhm.
have one other question here that I did want to ask. Hard Knock Life here is asking, what does Dr. Gress think about capitalism? And I think that's an interesting question because of the economic position
Mhm.
that we're in now, where women sort of
Mhm.
have to be in the workforce for
Mhm.
our economy to continue as it is.
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah.
thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, this could be a whole book, I think, in a lot of respects, because I think one of the things when we talk about capitalism today, we're not really dealing with pure capitalism. We're dealing with crony capitalism, and I think that that's an important thing to be mindful of. This isn't really a normal, ordered, free market. This is absolutely, corrupt capitalism. So I think that that's problematic. I think the alternative of communism, and we haven't talked about this at all yet, but just to see what happened in the 1900s to feminism, because we talked about the 1800s and how the layers of the occult. Well, in the 1900s, feminism really started like grafting on to communism, and this was really the motivator of Betty Friedan. And those
Yes.
three things that I mentioned, free love, the occult, and this radical egalitarianism or smashing the patriarchy, those things fit onto communism like hand in glove. You just have to replace the occult with atheism, which of course is a very easy trade-off when you're trying to take on a whole group of half the population. Of course, the communists are not going to care if there's a cult. It enters into the discussion. Um, so that was another really interesting area to look at it. And again, I don't mean to suggest that these are the only options, communism, capitalism, but I think that this is the way that we think about things again, because we like the
Right.
binary. But I think that Betty Friedan absolutely was very much influenced by Marx and Engels. She always said that she was just started being interested in feminism and women's issues in the 1950s, which is absolutely not true. She was very much, I found articles and things like that she had written. And there's a whole book actually written by a friend of hers that outlines her communist background. And Betty Friedan was not interested in helping this man write this book, but he wanted to write it because he thought it was just amazing that she was this communist that was able to navigate around McCarthyism, that she was never called out as a communist and really canceled by McCarthyism. So that was his whole focus with the author of this, Daniel Horowitz is his name, was to expose her, in a friendly way as a communist. And so we see in her work things like there was some journal entry that she had where she spoke about how women would never be free unless they got out of the home and they were doing productive work outside the home, because at that stage, communists have already decided that raising children was not productive. So they had to get out of the home. So all of this mirrors exactly what happened in the Soviet Union, except it was put in much different terms. The Soviet Union was very much a military overtaking. Our overtaking in a communist role was very much a cultural one. And so Betty Friedan, who had degrees in psychology, used all these amazing tactics to convince us that, we were missing out on something, or we were victims, that the home was this comfortable concentration camp that we absolutely had to get out of, or else we would be miserable. So she did this, snow job on all of us to believe that the home was this awful place. And of course, fast forward 50, 60 years, she wrote her book, The Feminine Mystique, in 1963. And of course, we're now in 2023. And you can see very clearly how much we bought into it. But at the same time, how much things of the home have come back. Like, people have this desire and yearning for home. And this has been one of the reasons why theology of home has been so successful. And people, I think, are really drawn to it, because all the elements of home are really attractive and compelling and beautiful. And all of them are popular, again, not just among Catholics, but on a secular level. What is not popular yet is still calling oneself a homemaker, even though we do all these things that are homemaking technically.
Well, it's fine if you hire somebody to do those things, but
Sure,
heaven
right.
forbid you do
call
them,
yourself that. No, or you
right?
call yourself that, because that's the
Exactly.
thing, or it's not just a hobby. So anyway, I think it's it's been really interesting to just see how loaded feminism is in leftism. Absolutely, the new left took over feminism in the second wave. You've got Angela Davis and Kate Millett, who were absolutely disciples of the Frankfurt School. So anyway, I don't want to get too much in the minutia, but I think what we're seeing is this crony capitalism, which is a lot of leftism built into it, and is highly, hugely problematic.
So this viewer is saying, okay, but capitalism is reinforcing feminism in the U.S. right now. What do you like? Do you have a response to that? Because I mean, in a sense, it's true, because it keeps women out of their homes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is a tough thing, but the impetus behind it is actually communism. Communism is the one that's telling us we have to do productive work. There's also, absolutely, I think there's a problem with avarice that drives that. There's also this, even the things like, where have the nuns gone? So that now,
yes,
how do
I'm like, we had this solved. The nuns were teachers. They were working in hospitals.
Right.
We had the feminine genius, so to speak, as JP2 would say, doing what is natural to them without sacrificing the family.
And because we've become sort of a two-child family, you also have things that are just, home prices have skyrocketed, because now there's people, our family, we've lived for a long time on one income, and we just couldn't do it and still educate our children. So there's two of us working now, but part of that is because of school prices and home prices, all of these things that are just imploding because of that. So I'm certainly sympathetic to that, but I think the real driver is the fact that women have been told they have to be workers. I think that enough of us said, I'm going to stay home with my children, then you wouldn't see that the inflationary elements happen. You would also see, if there was a sense of real spiritual motherhood, we wouldn't have had that crisis with the religious in the 1960s and beyond. So yeah, I think the start of that was absolutely communism and leftism, and that's when it's really been promoting it. But and again, there's problems with capitalism. The avarice is a huge issue. Keeping up with the Joneses, all of those kinds of things are problematic. But I think if we were going to start somewhere, it's not with capitalism per se. It's with
Yeah.
the roots of feminism.
I totally agree because I mean, I think people don't understand, especially maybe men, because like the way that we're raised is it's just different. Like, you know, at school, education is very much ordered towards teaching girls. It's, I mean, and the whole
Mhm.
time you're in school, your teachers are always telling you, you're going to do something amazing someday. And it's always understood that it's
Right.
not motherhood. It's going to
Yep.
be a career. Like that's something
Exactly.
that's going back to that article that I wrote about in Christ or wrote in
Mhm.
Crisis magazine. That's exactly what I talked about. And then when a woman is you know in her career, she feels like this is how she's going to be productive. And not only that, but
Mhm.
often her mom didn't teach her the skills for motherhood
Yeah.
and homemaking. And
Yep.
so you're expecting a woman who has not been taught how to be a mother. It wasn't modeled for her often because her mother
Mhm.
wasn't nurturing or her mother was working herself. And then she's been educated for 16 plus years that how to have a career. Nobody's primed her for motherhood. And so she becomes a mom and she comes home with a baby and all of a sudden it's very overwhelming because she's
Yeah.
still trying to keep her job. She's learning how to take care of a baby for the first time in her life and she's still learning how to be, God willing, a wife and a mother. And that's a huge learning curve. And so it's a lot easier for them to relegate the task of child rearing to a daycare provider because that's what's
Mhm.
expected. No one's going to judge her for that. Right. And
Yeah.
she can continue doing the things that she has been trained to do, which is a career and bringing money home. So I
Mhm.
think it's just hard maybe for men to understand that that's where we're brainwashed into that.
Yeah. Definitely. And I think also even, there's something very hard when you're growing up about saying, I want to be married. I mean, I remember growing up and just people joking about like, oh, she's just in college because she wants an MRS degree. I mean, it's a very
Yeah.
old concept, but what a walk of shame that was for someone to, be branded with that. And, even as Catholics, the vocational question isn't something that a woman can just strategize and solve. She cannot make the man that she's going to marry materialize on her own. She cannot
Right.
make these the way that she makes choices in her career, she can't make these choices about meeting a mate because it's not something that she can do. So there's even in that, there's a certain amount of something that has to be gifted to us that we are not trained to do. We're told and trained the way you articulated beautifully to go out and grasp at things and get things and be focused on that. And so it's very unsettling and difficult and takes a lot of rewiring and prayer to sort of start thinking about these things in dramatic ways and new ways. So yeah, I think all of that is really important for us to be mindful of is just how
Hmm.
challenging it really is to start thinking of ourselves as mothers if we've never been, trained or seen all of it, if that hasn't been modeled for us.
Well, I don't know about you, but it's wild to me in hindsight. But I was even when I was an anti-abortion activist in college, I mean,
Mhm.
I never really envisioned what motherhood would look like. I couldn't.
Yeah,
Even
right. Yeah,
growing up, I
yeah.
never thought about what it would be like to have kids. I figured I'd get married, but I
Mhm.
never once, I'm not kidding. And I'm out on the front lines trying to save babies and talking to moms, helping moms become mothers. I ran a pregnancy center. I started running a pregnancy center shortly after I had my first. But yeah, I mean, it was like I never thought about motherhood. I didn't. I mean,
Right.
if you would have asked me how many kids I would have, I don't know, maybe a couple or something. I don't, it just wasn't something I thought about.
Yeah.
And nobody helped me think about that either. It's just
Mhm.
wild to me. So, but I don't think I'm the only one, you know?
No, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that's super important for all women, especially women who are older, to start mentoring younger women, even if it's not in a direct way. But I love that idea of just having a woman over to just be around her kids and bake something together, or,
Yes.
those kinds of very simple things that are actually really enjoyable. Have a glass of wine and just sit around and talk and do something and let people see what family life is like. And I think a lot of times we feel like if we invite people over, everything has to be really perfect. And I think it's important for people to see the not perfect as well, and to realize that this is, things go on, and this is how kind of children are raised in the midst of this chaos. But yeah, I always wanted a lot of children. I think once I accepted the idea that I would get married, and once I really became Catholic. But yeah, I remember it's actually my husband who taught me how to cook. He's an excellent
My
cook.
husband did too,
I know.
actually, a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I didn't know how to, like, cook a chicken. I thought a really good dinner was like, here's some pasta sauce in the jar, and I like the
Always
pasta, and
the college food, right? Yeah.
right, here's some salad from the box, and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. But so yeah, I think all of that. And now that I've had my fifth child, in fact, at one point I was kind of laughing because I thought, this feels really easy. Like, why does this feel easy? And not that it's objectively easy, but the fact that a lot of the anxieties that you have with your early children are gone because you know
Yeah.
what to do. Like, I remember my worst fear was like, what do I do when she starts like vomiting? Like, I was just scared to death of
Yeah.
flus. And I think once you sort of deal with that, then you realize, like, okay, this is how you move on, and it's not this like a huge fear anymore. So
Mhm.
that was another really amazing. And of course, I also had older children that could help at that stage too, which I never had
Mhm.
before when I had the first four very close together. So that was an incredible gift, especially because I don't live near family. I don't have close friends that I could just pass people off to or children off to at different stages. So it was
Yeah.
really amazing thing to have the fifth and be able to say, can you just pick up the baby for a while? Um,
Right.
so it's those things that you just don't hear about because so many of us, again, are so focused on the career that we just don't even begin to imagine what happens over time and how a family grows and grows into the numbers and all of that. It's really beautiful, actually.
Yeah, and that lack of community too, because so many women are working, whereas, you used to have all the moms at home and they would get together
Right.
during the day with their kids. We don't have that anymore. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, I just would ask people who are very hard. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are hard. There are a lot of women who are working that would really rather not be working.
Yeah.
But we can't know exactly their financial situation. We can't
Mhm.
exactly know their support system. Um, I mean, yeah, the mental health aspect, I'm not saying that I
Mhm.
think women should be out of their homes working. I don't believe that.
Mhm.
That's why I don't.
Mhm.
But I think we have to look with a little more compassion and look at the bigger picture because
Yeah.
um, they weren't taught how to be moms,
Yeah.
and if they don't have that support system in place, it's just really hard to break those cycles, especially if you don't even see that there's a cycle that needs to be broken.
Right.
So
And there's a lot of pressure from all kinds of sides, I think too. So, and there's also seasons of life too that
for sure.
change a lot and take on different tasks. I know this is why I started writing because I was home and I'd finished my PhD and I thought, well, I can write a book if I just finish that dissertation. So anyway, and it worked
I
amazingly
don't know how
well.
you did that, but that's amazing.
So, well, that's a whole other conversation, but, in any
Oh.
event, yeah, it was, but I think that it worked well. Like, I remember writing my dissertation, and I would work on it at night after the children are in bed, and, then the next day, I would think about what I was gonna write that night. Like, I just could process
Mm.
what I had already done and what needed to be done. So, it was really an amazing, um, dynamic because I wasn't doing a lot of heavy lifting intellectually during the day, and then at night, I could, kinda balance things out. So, it worked out really well, but
That's
yeah,
amazing.
it
Well,
was season
do you have any other things coming up here soon that people should be paying
different.
attention to? I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk more about your work before we sign off for the
Yeah.
day.
No, I mean, I think, my time has really been consumed by the end of Woman, of late, but, of course, we're always doing stuff at Theology of Home. It's our busy season now as Advent and Christmas are hitting. And that's been, I think, really just the incredible blessing because it feels like through those books, we can gently and lovingly and beautifully show women a different way to live their lives, that these are not weirdos that are doing staying at home with their children. And Emily Malloy just published for us the Theology of Home 4, which is arranging the seasons. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's stunning. She's this like force of nature. It's
It's on
amazing
my
what,
wish list to get all of everything.
yeah.
My husband, I have a lot of books, So my
Mhm.
husband is always like, "You need to stop buying books." I'm like, "But I
Yep.
can't."
No, believe me, I get that. But, yeah, this is gonna be I'm excited about it because it feels like such a great, um, gift to give, especially at Christmas, but, yeah, it's just so well done. She grew all the flowers, she arranged all the flowers, she styled all the images, she took all the photos. I mean, this is like
Wow,
a
that's a work of love, like, that is amazing.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I don't know
amazing.
anybody else that could do all of those things and pull it off so beautifully and compellingly. She wrote the text, all of that. So, Noelle and I just sit back in awe that she was able to pull this off because we certainly had a professional photographer, when we did our books. And so, yeah, that's been new and fun. And yeah, I think we're always trying to figure out how do we help women understand themselves as women in a way that's compelling, that uses the culture, that is beautiful instead of awkward and kitschy or whatever. So
Yes. Yeah.
so we'll see what the new year brings, but
You
it's
do a
been
wonderful job. You
oh,
guys
thank
really
you.
do. So,
Wow. We know that's how the culture was destroyed, was through these kinds of books, through daytime TV and um, magazines, all of that. So it just seems fitting that we should start reclaiming some of this. And one of these days, I would love to have oodles of money and be able to start an actual magazine and have it come out monthly. But we're not there yet, so we'll see
not
what the Holy
yet,
Spirit has in mind.
someday.
Yeah,
That's
we'll see.
amazing. Thank you for coming on to Integrated and chatting with me about all of these amazing things. I think that was just a great conversation. We covered everything. We covered a lot.
We hit
So,
a lot of
thank you so
ground. Yeah,
much.
my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks everyone who joined today in the chat. Again, please feel free to subscribe, like, and share, and we will see you next time.